Morning arrived, and with it came all the familiar effects of a normal day in the city. Just another normal day, despite what had happened last night. A reminder that he still had much to learn before the world would care to revolve around him. Mistress Hyadon, an old dark-skinned Carolassian woman, was conducting her normal rounds, sprucing up the infirmary as he awoke. She was the resident nurse, and had tended to him many a time over the years. "What's got you in here?" she said, her voice rising up and down with each word in the melodic accent of her homeland. "Oh, just more rebel activity," said Melend, rising from the bed and walking towards the exit casually. "Don't suppose you know if the guard captain's in right now?" She shook her head. "Not be seeing him, so. Lieutenant said to make sure you go straight home besides." She furrowed her brows at him and put a hand on her hip, giving him a look that meant business. "I shall remain dutiful, mistress," he murmured, slipping past her and out of the infirmary. She stared at him as he left, and even followed him out in the hallway and watched him to make sure he didn't turn towards the officers' quarters. The damn woman was insufferable. He had figured Harwin would be bluffing about keeping him from duty. He hadn't expected the man to actually pit the rest of the Brightsworn against him. But that was fine. He could spend today practicing Earth. There were other things he could do besides work, though he was lying to himself if he didn't admit that everything he needed and wanted to know was some branch or business related to the Brightsworn. And so a scowl formed on his face unconsciously, he only realizing its arrival when some of the men on campus exclaimed at him, inquiring as to the nature of his ire. He passed by the statue of Garen Sherwind, standing inside of a small cloister. It wasn't uncommon for an establishment of Belbright to have some sort of homage to one of the cities, and by extension the country that had formed around it, founding fathers, but for the Brightsworn he was something more. He had founded their order all those centuries ago, and he was a symbol of justice and honor. A symbol of what every Brightsworn strived to be. It was a hard legacy to live up to, but that was all part of the prestige that came with their order, or at least, used to. He left the grounds, waving at the men, who called out to him. "Where you going, Sergeant? You forget your armor at home?" "I've got more important business than dealing with you louts today. Don't let me hear about you falling asleep on stall duty again, Royson," he yelled back in return. "It was one time," the private responded, and the men broke into laughter as he left earshot. He nodded at the men manning the gate as they closed it behind him, and they saluted in response as he returned to the streets. Without his armor, he was just a regular citizen on the streets, and no one gave him a second glance as he navigated the commons. His first destination was in the north end of the trade quarter, a short walk away, though the foot traffic was considerable this time of day. Carts strolled by as well, containing nobility he was unsurprised to see that was foreign to Belbright. With the coming festival, it was normal to see nobility from all over Virgos establish themselves early as they made whatever connections and deals that the affluent of society was wont to do. That was no doubt one of the real reasons the Festival of Grace was resuming so soon after the insurrection. Lord Felrin could sell it to the city as simply restoring a national tradition, but anyone with sense knew that there was simply too much wealth on the line to keep postponing the return of the mass annual congregation of the world's elite to the city. It was good for them, and extremely good for Belbright. The city depended on these connections, and indeed, Belbright was known to be a melting pot of sorts, owing to its status as a place that welcomed all. There were, of course, some who were not so welcome in Belbright, the Albiran, for example, and that was even before the insurrection. But relations had worsened after the speaker's assassination. Albiran had denied all association with those involved in the speaker's death, which had not been well received. Beyond that, however, they shared a rather violent history with their northern neighbors, constantly fighting over the right to construct ports along the part of the Tamarath River that they shared, especially since Albiran was mostly dry desert. Personally, he struggled to blame them. They needed it more, but Belbright was able to leverage their region-wide influence into strong arming negotiations in their favor. It was harsh, but it was the reality. Beyond that, however, there were the more universally disliked people of the Northeast, namely Sidrophonites, but for entirely different reasons. Lastly, their cousins to the east of New Eowlin, but relations with them had seemed to cool nowadays. In any case, it wasn't as if they weren't allowed in the city, but they did not receive kind looks or words while they were there, and that was for certain. Someone bumped into him, a man wearing a Carolassian hat, though he was suspiciously not Carolassian. He murmured his apologies as Melend felt something search through his pockets, and he struck his hand out, seizing the man's wrist in the act. The man screamed out in pain and shock, and Melend knocked off his hat in irritation, then sighed as he recognized the face. Malt, didn't I just get done telling you last week to quit with the pickpocketing? Malt was a young lad, a couple of years younger than Melend, and he was a typical Belbretian, with tan skin and black hair. He had long, supple fingers, perfect for slipping into unsuspecting pockets. Pickpocketing? He asked, feigning shock, a small crowd forming on the side of the street as others with more important things to do strode around them. I wasn't... Me? You'd think that of me? Why aren't you wearing your armor? Cut the honey, he said, annoyed. I'm not on duty today, and I've got things to do, so I'm going to let you off with a warning, but it's going to cost you. The man seemed as if he'd rather be taken to jail upon hearing this turn of events. Cost me? How much? Molend leaned in close to the thief and said, I've some business in the West later. Some questions that need answering. You're going to help me with that. The man squirmed in protest, but Molend held his wrist fast, squeezing. How full are your cells? He let go of the man's wrist and pushed him away lightly. I'll see you later, Molt. Enjoy the festival, yeah? Try not to get caught before I come to collect. The man gave him a sour look as Molend turned back towards his destination. That had been a stroke of luck. Having a criminal as a liaison to the underground in the West would make things easier. Molend remembered something, however, before he began walking away and whirled about, others in the street exclaiming as he barreled towards Molt. He grabbed the man and dragged him forcefully out of the street into an alley, drawing plenty of attention. I wasn't going to steal any more. Honest, Mel. Not that, he said hastily. How did he ask this? The stories, you know, of how people are disappearing. They still going around? The man went ashen-faced, nodding mutely. That was too much of a reaction. You've seen them, haven't you? He asked quietly. Felt them, Mel. They're real. Leviathan swallow me whole, they're real. You've got to believe me. I do, he said. That confirmed his fears. There were fangs in Belbright. But for what? They had attacked him, and were attacking the common people. Fangs were made to assassinate Magi. He supposed he may have given off some sort of arcane signature, but that didn't answer as to why the homeless of the West were the ones being targeted for the most part. And now they were leaking over into the actual city. What was going on? He let the man's collar go, straightening him, and then covering his own mouth, stroking at his chin as he thought. He jerked his head back towards the street, and the lowly criminal left, shaken. And here I am, working on a day I'm supposed to be arresting, he muttered to himself, smiling grimly. Harwin would be furious. He took off out of the alleyway at a quick stride, people clearing out of his way as they saw the intent on his face. He made his way through the trade district without any further incident, coming upon his original destination, the Groggy Traveler. The inn was in good repair compared to most, being one of the more popular in the city, and this close to the festival it was bustling with activity even so early in the day, stable hands leading the horses by the nose, men and women loitering out front, laughing good-naturedly. He saw a few Carolassian merchants, a couple that looked to be from Golden Shore, judging by the hair, and even a party of men from Farhaven, by their clothing. He walked on by, entering the tavern, the lively sounds already attacking his ears before he strode through the doorway. Welcome to... Oh, Melend, my boy. How have you been? Are you here to see your mother? Said a familiar voice, and Melend looked to his left to see Master Gilbert, the tavern owner. The aging man was short and portly, a native of Belbright, yet bearing a snaking mustache that was very much not in the style of typical fashion within the city. His mother had been waging a war to have him exterminate the furry beast for a good time, but it had been a losing affair from the start. The man claimed it was integral to the success of the inn, a vital part of their brand. He liked Master Gilbert. Melend had known him all of his life, and he was the closest thing to an uncle that he had. He was a kind man with a soft heart, and well liked by his patrons and the people of the city. Good, Master Gilbert, he said, shaking the man's hand firmly, and the man exclaimed in mock surprise, punching him lightly in the side. You've a grip on you there, my boy, getting stronger by the day. You said that a week ago, Gilbert, said Melend dryly. Only because you're improving. Come, come, let us find your mother. She's been fretting about you. Well, you and the inn. We filled up on rooms, you see, and we've already had to deal with some people who were none too happy about finding out about that. Poor souls, he said, sighing in genuine empathy. They've heard that this is the very best place to be, the very best, but we must refuse them still, mustn't we? Not enough to go around. I told your mother we should have bought out the podium all those years ago, or went to Sister Tavern, but she thought it would be too much for my old bones. Me? Old? Can you believe such a thing, my boy? Oh, Serena, careful with that. Hi, said Master Gilbert, raising his elbow up high and slapping it, all of this occurring just below Milen's chin. Keep it high and balance. That's key, my dear. Oh, she's trying her hardest, but I'm afraid we'll have to get someone new. She's broken several glasses this week already, he said, shaking his head. Such a sweet girl. He turned back to Milen, smiling, though he obviously seemed a bit lost. What was it you came here for again, my boy? Just wanted to let my mother know I was still alive, he said. But I can find her on my own, though, Master Gilbert. I wouldn't want to stop you from helping the guests. Are you sure, my boy? It's no trouble, really. A crash sounded off to the side, and they heard exclamations of shock, and the sound of a young girl apologizing profusely as Gilbert bustled past Milend. He turned about while he was walking and said, If you're hungry, my boy, just go into the kitchen and take what you need. Milend smiled, shaking his head, standing and watching the scene. The girl, Serena, had spilled some ale on one of the guests, and she was sobbing with her hands on her face, though the man seemed none too perturbed about the whole affair, awkwardly trying to help Master Gilbert console her. The old innkeeper brought her to her feet slowly, carrying her off out of sight, and the man at his table laughed heartily as he was passed a new drink. It felt good to come to the traveler and just be around the audience. He supposed that was part of why it was so popular. He felt at home here, as if he could just let his guard down and relax. He turned about, looking for his mother, and saw her exit the kitchen with a few plates of food and mugs of ale, balancing them with expert skill, moving about the tables with an elegance and speed only years of experience could lend. She wasn't a tall woman, which, given his height, meant he had taken after his father in that regard, but she was a Belbright native, born and raised. She had long, black hair and the amber eyes he had inherited, and certainly she was a handsome woman. Many of the men watched her with appreciation, and he had witnessed many men attempt to chase her over the years, but none had ever really come close. He caught her eye, waving, and she smiled warmly at him and mouthed, "Give me a moment," before hurrying off to the table that was destined for a hearty meal. Seeing the chicken bursting with vibrant colors and juices, he felt his stomach growl. He didn't like to take the free handouts Gilbert tried to force upon him whenever he visited, but he was hungry. He entered the kitchen, the room a chaotic swirl of activity and cuisine. The head cook, Mistress Anon, was barking orders at an unholy pace while glazing a whole chicken with a deft hand. Her eyes flicked to Melend and took in his presence, the order stopping for the shortest of instants, then continuing as she put the chicken down to rest, walking over and hugging him while still shouting orders. "You're feeling fuller, Melend. Are you finally eating properly? You know, I know a girl your age, pretty thing, and of good Riften stock. She likes a strong man, and you're a handsome one. She'd love to marry you. I could set you up, if you wished." He smiled, despite the trap he had suddenly found himself in. The woman was relentless in trying to match him for marriage. Did old women just sit around all day trying to pair off young people like a card game? "Oh, I think I'm still not quite ready to settle down, Mistress Anon. I wouldn't want to worry a woman needlessly with a dangerous job like mine." "Nonsense," she said. "Lizzie, we need more cabbage for the Carolassians. Fetch it from storage. Anyways, when I was your age, I had already popped out 3 children and turned my husband into a proper father, nice and fat and happy. You're going to waste, my boy. You need to make the most of your young years while you can still run around with the children. Besides," she said, leaning in close, "Gilbert is starting to slow down. He can't manage the inn forever. Someone is going to need to inherit it and help your mother manage it in a few years. It's time to settle down soon, my boy. Pick someone who will love you for who you are, rather than for the inn and the money now, before it's too late." He sighed inwardly. This again. "I'll keep it in mind, mistress. Can I have a breast or two?" She laughed roughly. "Guardian's mercy, Melend. You haven't even met the girl yet." He blushed furiously, and she laughed even harder and said, "Of course, my boy, of course. Take what you want." He did so, taking some chicken in a plate and eating it furiously, his mood soured somewhat by all the mothering. They all treated him like a child still, as if he hadn't killed men, looked them in their eyes and saw the terror in them as the light left. The smoke of cooking food wafted around the kitchen and entered his nose, and suddenly memories of the day at the West Quarter had exploded flooded his mind, and he jerked suddenly, having to grab a nearby table to steady himself. He cursed to himself, looking around to see if anyone had noticed, but if they had, they gave no indication. He didn't quite feel hungry anymore, putting the chicken down and wrapping it up to finish later. Smells were the worst, and could trigger the memories so suddenly he didn't even have time to steel himself. All it took was the hint of smoke, and he could remember the fire, the blood, the screaming. The world lurched, and he gripped the table hard, shaking his head to rid himself of the memories. Breathe. He needed to breathe. He closed his eyes and tried to clear the images from his mind. It frustrated him that he still could not overcome this weakness. What would the men think if they knew he couldn't even be around a kitchen without losing his mind? Soft, warm hands steadied him, and he felt something like a calming gust blow through his body. And he turned his head, his mother's worried face there. "Are you all right, son?" He hadn't meant to let his mother see. She always worried needlessly. He smiled, though she didn't return it, and said, Yes, I'm all right. Perfectly whole and fine, Mother." She looked at him, obviously disbelieving, and said, "Melinda Aldane, you'll have to get up quite early to fool me. Come to the back room and let me take a look at you," she ordered, and he grumbled as he obeyed, walking with her. They entered a separate, intermediate room that led outside, and Melinda sat down upon a wooden crate, his mother fretting about him. She closed her eyes and held his shoulders, and he felt the familiar touch of her mending, and he gave a sharp look, though she returned it with fiery defiance. "I didn't say you could mend me, Mother." "I can very well do what is best for my child, so long as he is my child," she challenged, and his face soured again, and she laughed. "Oh, don't pout, Melinda. You're terrible at it." "Just like you're terrible at obeying the law. You know you're not allowed to do that. You know as well as I that the city is littered with wards these days. What if the Covenant caught you?" "The law is against thieves using their magic for personal gain, not for helping their knucklehead sons," she said, tapping him lightly across the head. "I'd hope they would have better things to do than investigate someone as harmless as me." "And what about Caden? The Covenant is harsh when it comes to punishing a magi for things those he knows does. Did you think about that? What if you cost him his promotion?" She frowned, looking somewhat guilty, and said, "I hadn't thought of that." He nodded in satisfaction, and she scowled suspiciously at him. "You only get argumentative when you're up to no good. What are you up to? Why aren't you working today?" It was his turn to go on the defensive now, and he withered underneath her suspicion. Nothing. I just came to say hello, that's all," he said, a touch too quickly, and she squinted her eyes at him shrewdly. "I swear, Mother." Well, I can't stop you. Guardian knows I've tried. But so help me, Melinda, I will do what Mistress Anon has been telling me to do for years, and settle you down with a nice woman, and she will make sure you never get up to any tomfoolery ever again." He felt the blood drain from his face in horror, and she smiled devilishly at him, satisfied. "Anyways," he said, desperate to change the subject, "there's something I needed to tell you. I don't want you out late by yourself anymore. I'll start coming to pick you up and escort you home. The streets are not safe right now." She raised an eyebrow at him, amused, and said, "I think I'm old enough to walk home by myself, son." "No," he said, irritated. "Stop being stubborn. I'm serious. Someone was killed in an alleyway yesterday, and that was in broad daylight. I don't want you out there by yourself." "And what if you don't come home like last night?" she challenged. "You don't get to worry me like that and then scold me, Blend. That is not how this works." He felt a pang of guilt and said, "I'm sorry, Mother, but that's all the more reason I need you to listen to me. There are things going on right now. Something bad is coming," he said, quietly. "We're all each other's got, you know?" She sighed, then smiled sadly at him. "All right, you've convinced me. I can't resist that look of yours when you get serious. You just..." She faltered, embarrassed, but the damage was done. He knew what she was going to say. "You just look so much like your father." Cool fury lit his blood alight, though he remained in control. He still hadn't forgiven her for keeping the true nature of his father from him. especially after what had happened during the insurrection. "Meland," she began awkwardly. "It's fine," he said, feeling guilty for how he spoke, then feeling even more anger fill him for feeling guilty. She had been the one to wrong him, and that was a complicated wound, one that would take a long time to heal. He rose, looking towards the door, and his mother looked at him helplessly. "It's fine," he said, exhaling the anger from his blood. "I'm not mad, Mother. I hope things at the end go well today," he finished, forcing a smile, turning to go before she could say anything further. It was midday when Caden arrived on the rooftop, climbing up the ladder and bidding his greetings cheerfully. Though the sun was still out, Melend found himself looking towards the spires of Indestin, as he often did when he found himself needing to think. Caden came to stand by him, following his gaze. "Something troubling you?" he asked. He knew Melend's tendencies well. "A good deal. I've been thinking about the Fangs. What are they after? And who is sending them?" Caden frowned, then said, "I meant more along the personal sort of lines, Mel." Melend shook his head. "This is personal, Caden. Why did they attack me? They're moving out of the west now where they've been active for some time. They attacked some random civilians, but then me? I felt it at the scene of the body, Caden. I see that now. I felt it follow Oliven, too. What if someone's trying to amass an army of Fangs to take down the Covenant?" Caden looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think the embassy would fall to such an army?" Melend thought it over. The Fang he had fought hadn't really seemed truly capable of taking out a Magi, now that he thought about it. To be honest, he had been close to defeating it even without the light. "You've been thinking this over too, haven't you?" "I have. Mel, the information we have on Fangs is that they could fight even Spellblades. Their Dome of Silence was able to suppress arcane power to a stifling degree, rendering Magi little more than a regular man. Their skill with the blade was legendary as well, their strength awesome. There was nothing else at the scene of your battle. The creature that attacked you simply dissipated, and that's consistent with lesser creations of Lifebringers. Whatever attacked you was not a true Fang, not yet. Whoever was responsible for these Fangs is obviously still practicing, still refining their technique. The only question is why they're being so careless now. I was going to recommend we bring this to the attention of the Covenant and let them handle things, but now I'm not so sure," he finished, frowning. "Something feels strange. I think for now, it's best we just lie low and observe." "Observe?" Melend exclaimed. "While people die to these things? I'm not going to do that, Caden. I can help them. Caden held up a hand. "How? Are you going to expose yourself as a light wielder in front of everyone? We still don't know the limits of your power. In fact, we know almost nothing about your power. Records of the light are thousands of years old, Mel. We need to be slow with this. Patience is key." Melend looked at his friend, incredulous. "Patience? It's been 2 whole years, Caden. I'm through being patient. This is my He bit off. He hadn't meant to let that slip through. But his friend narrowed his eyes. "Look, Mel, I know you have ideas about the light, and about what it means for you," said Caden, hesitant. "But, like I said, we don't know anything. What if you can't control your power? What if you hurt someone? The Covenant would not let you walk around free. The Spellblades, they certainly would not let you walk around free." "Fuck the Spellblades, Caden," he yelled, his anger exploding. "They can't touch me when I hold the light, and I will make them pay for what they did. Their whole order needs to be wiped clean. He took a calming breath. "When I learn to control the Guardian's power, I will make them pay. Until then, I will do what they should be doing and protect this city. I have a responsibility to. Someone has to do it." "What's your plan then?" challenged Caden. "Go around the west and just walk around until you feel a Fang, then fight it until it nearly kills you and forces the light out? Fantastic, Mel. Brilliant. You'll get on the conclave with thinking like that." He wanted to punch his friend, but he was right. It was a stupid plan, and he tried to rein himself in. Rational. That's what Caden wanted. He would go along with whatever Melend said, as long as it was rational. All right, he said coolly. Then information. We need to observe, right? Kata nodded slowly, wary of Milan's line of thinking, and Milan smiled. Then we can still go to the west, we'll just be helpful in a different way, and I've got the perfect lead. He looked back, out over the city, at the sun hanging in the sky, shining down upon the brilliant spires. And if we hurry, we can be back in time for dinner.